let's get started. We in the last couple of webinars we talked about a lot about technology, and today we wanted to do something slightly different. Technology is still a very important component and element of what we do, and it will come handy at the end of this webinar. I'll show you how. But what we wanted to speak about today was really education destinations, and particularly education destinations outside what we call the Big Four. The Big Four are Australia, of course, Canada, the US, and the UK. Together, these four have kind of monopolized international student mobility for the better part of the last 30 years. When I say monopolize, we're looking at about 80 to 90% of all international students going to those four destinations. And guess what? Things are changing, hence this webinar. So, what are we going to be talking about today? I'll give a very brief introduction of who we are as a company, of who I am, why students and parents and now education agencies are looking at alternative education destinations. We'll look at the trends that have happened with and after COVID. This is particularly important because a lot of people say, oh, the world has changed after COVID. I think there were a lot of things that were changing before COVID. There are a lot of things that are still changing after COVID. COVID represents that point in time in which we kind of say, oh, well, everything changed. But the reality is that the landscape, the international student mobility landscape now is completely different to what it was in 2019. There's been some significant factors outside, universities making decisions, and those are visa and policy changes. So we'll explore those as well. We'll look at what those alternative education destinations are: New Zealand, Europe, Southeast Asia, and more. But those are the three ones that we focus on at AIG. Why lifestyle matters. It's not just about rankings. It's about cost of living. It's about feeling welcome. It's about making friends. It's about being safe. It's about the lifestyle as well, which in those alternative education destinations that we're going to be talking about today, you will find they are very, very interesting value propositions when it comes to lifestyle, and whether Achiever can help with those destinations and finding out more and help your students decide where they want to go for their study abroad experience. A little bit about who we are. So the AIG Education Group is both an agency and a technology provider. My role as Luca, as the sales director for Achiever, is very much the technology provider. So we have a fantastic AI-powered technology that helps students, parents, and agencies find information about anything and everything that is related to international student mobility. And then for the agencies, there is also an opportunity to collect the lead and then contact the students directly. There is an AI interface, which is very much similar to, or it is in fact an AI assistant. And then there is a CRM as well. And the CRM is how our agencies and agency people, agency staff from managing directors down to the junior counselors, they manage applications, they manage their staff, they manage partnerships and commissions as well. Please do get in touch with me if you want to find out more about that. That's not the scope of today. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of who we are. Me, I spent the last 12 to 15 years in international student recruitment, chiefly in two different spaces. One is pure international student recruitment with universities. I worked at the University of Queensland, Deakin University, RMIT, Griffith College, public-private, did a few other things as well. And then I spent a handful of years as well in education technology. And I've seen incredible technology being injected into the international student mobility landscape in the last 5 to 10 years. There's a lot of great technology out there. So it's a space that has always fascinated me, without forgetting, obviously, that the student is who we are here for. But it's been fascinating combining that you know, the human element with the technology as well. So let's get started. Why beyond the big four? Well, the traditional dominance of those big four, once again, Australia, UK, US, and Canada, persists. So if you ask any student around the world, 80% of 8 times out of 10, they will say, hey, well, you know, I'm thinking about Canada, the US, the UK, or Australia. The reality, though, is that these students are also reading the news. They're very savvy, very intelligent, very always on their smartphone. So they know that visa policy has changed across the board at those 4 study destinations, that there's been other elements that are not necessarily pushing them away, but force them to think about something else. And I refer to things like international student caps. And so their dominance, the dominance of the big 4 education destinations, is still there, but it's not quite as strong as it was before. There's an issue with affordability. If you're familiar with the Australian dollar, the average tuition fee here in Australia for a public university for an international student is anywhere between $30,000 and $35,000, with peaks of $50,000, $55,000 a year in tuition fees alone. We're talking about group of 8 universities here, and that's just the tuition fees over a period of 3 years, combined with higher cost of living, transportation, food, having to survive, is a very substantial investment for a student and a parent. And so students are considering now education destinations that are a little bit cheaper, where they still can study high quality education, but maybe at a slightly cheaper price. There's an issue with accessibility, and we touched on that earlier with visa policies, government involvements. I think certainly for Australia, we can say that the international student recruitment policy landscape was quite liberal for a number of years, until, you know, the last couple of years, where there's been quite profound restrictions being placed on how universities and vocational colleges can recruit students. There's issues, not necessarily issues, but restrictions around migration. There's also very important and kind of hard measures like the international student cap, which we've seen in both Australia and Canada. And I absolutely don't want this webinar to become political, but it is a fair comment, in my opinion, the rise of right-wing parties in some of these countries, which means that certain students that are looking to move to one of those 4 destinations for a relatively long period of time might be influenced by, because traditionally right-wing parties are not necessarily against migration, but they tend to curb migration. And off the back of that, of course, we have global dynamics with a new president in the White House in the US, trading wars, and student mobility shifts in Europe as well. And we'll touch on that soon. But really, as the big 4 kind of close their doors at least a little bit, new education destinations are hungry for international students. Now, this is a graph that I put together by kind of bringing together, merging a bunch of different sources. Of course, I deliberately focused and placed the attention on the education destinations that we service, namely Italy, France, Southeast Asia, as well as New Zealand, outside the big 4. But what this shows you is that the yellow columns here are the big fours. And this was before COVID, where they, as I said earlier, utterly dominated student interest. If you asked any student what they thought about education destinations before COVID, the answer would have been 99%, from 99% of the students, Australia, Canada, the US, or the UK. As I said earlier, there is still very much a case of students wanting to go to those education destinations, but as you can see, the interest has waned a little bit for the four big education destinations, while it's increased quite a lot for Europe, particularly for Italy, France, Germany, and Ireland. We'll discuss Ireland quite a bit later on. Southeast Asia, which is geographically closer to a lot of Asian students that are looking to study abroad, and of course, New Zealand. New Zealand is often considered the little brother of Australia. Well, the reality is that they have an excellent education system, fantastic universities, and migration policies that are a little bit more friendly than Australia at this particular point in time. They've also released recently, I believe maybe 3 years ago, a migration strategy that really places the emphasis on quality versus quantity. So that they've done a lot of things right, and now they're ready to welcome really good quality students that can bring a cultural element to New Zealand as a country, but also contribute to their or go against their skills shortages as well. So what has happened since COVID? I want to stress that it wasn't COVID that caused this. COVID was a particular point in time in which things started to change, or more so, we noticed that change, but the change started before, and certainly that change is carrying over right now. So things keep changing. COVID was just a point in time. It wasn't the main cause of all the change, or maybe it was, but it wasn't the only reason. Since COVID, there's been a shift in student preferences and in a very strong increase within education destinations for interesting regional hubs. This is quite an interesting thing to say, because obviously when it comes to regional hubs, there are some visa advantages and benefits, but also there is the ability to see something slightly different. In the case of Australia, for example, if you go to Melbourne or Sydney or Brisbane, all you see is the metropolitan Australia. If you go regional, for example, if you go to Wagga Wagga or Bendigo or Ballarat, or if you go to regional Western Australia, there are some fantastic opportunities to really explore a completely different but very exciting lifestyle. Post-study work rights in Europe are now much better publicized and more accessible as well. I want to stress that post-study work rights do exist in Europe as well. They certainly do exist in Ireland, in Italy, in France, in Germany as well. They are called something slightly different, which varies from country to country. But if you ask me, is it possible for an international student to stay beyond the completion of their program in one of those countries? The answer is absolutely yes. Temporarily, but the answer is absolutely yes. So for students that are looking to employ the skills that they learn at university through a work experience at one of those education destinations, the answer is yes, absolutely, you can. There are caps that have been introduced since COVID. Chiefly, the very first country that introduced those was Canada. Then there was Australia, and the UK don't have a hard cap, but they've kind of banned the dependents. So there's been a lot of policy making that has driven the education destinations, those big four education destinations, towards caps and PR restrictions. And there are other post-study barriers in the big four. In Australia, for example, it used to be very, very easy to get post-study work rights. In a way, it is still, but it's a lot more complicated and a lot more expensive than it was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And I think what we're seeing in a world that is increasingly unstable, particularly at the political level, students are looking for more stable, welcoming destinations. It is a natural human reaction when things change so quickly, when there is instability, people tend to panic. And the very first thing that they want is stability. If you look at the stock market, you know, all the brokers love stability. Instability generates a lot of problems. It's a bit of a stretch here, but international education is very much the same. Students, parents, agencies love stability. Clear rules. I can follow those rules. I don't want any changes, because every time there is a change, it just creates that problem where no one really knows what's going to happen next. I know this is quite important for you, so I wanted to summarize it here. I must stress this is not a comprehensive table. We at AIG service, of course, the big four destinations. So we can place students in Australia, in Canada, in the US, in the UK. But we also work with a select group of universities in Ireland, in Italy, in France. We're trying to get more in Germany as well, because we know that a lot of our students are asking about Germany. We work with all the New Zealand institutions as well. So this table summarizes essentially the education destinations that we place our students into. And what you can see here immediately is that the post-study work rights do exist outside Australia, Canada, US, and the UK. It is a misconception, and I want to bust this myth that if you go and study in France or in Italy, once you finish your program, you have to leave the country. That's not the case. I also want to bust the myth that the economy in Australia, in Italy or France or in Europe is not quite as strong as it should be to be able to support students looking for jobs. It is absolutely true that the European economy is not quite as strong as the big four, but there are still very good opportunities for bright international students that choose the right courses and the right programs and develop the right skills to be able to inject themselves into the workforce there. In France and in Italy, you can obtain post-study work rights, which are called something slightly different. The name in Italian is something like temporary permit for job seekers, which allows a student, as long as they apply for the post-study work rights before their current student visa expires, it allows them to stay in Italy for another 12 months looking for jobs. So they don't need to have a job when they apply for the job seeker visa, and they're allowed to stay for 12 months. During this 12 months, they have to secure employment to be able to stay longer term, and that leads to eventually permanent residency and all those things if the student is good enough, and obviously if they find the right opportunities. Same in France, except that in France there's also an option for master students to stay 24 months, so 2 years. In Ireland, it's very much like it is in Australia, so two-year post-study work rights, as you know, depending on the different programs. And in New Zealand, it varies between 1 and 3, depending on whether the student is studying vocational, university, masters, or PhDs. So once again, I want to stress that the opportunity to stay in the country and look for the right work opportunity does exist in alternative education destinations, and especially the ones that we at AIG service. So what is it that this, sorry, I thought there was an image here, but it must have gone, so apologies. The alternatives, what do these education destinations offer? Tuition affordability. I prepared a table in about a couple of slides where I show you that if you decided, or one of your students decided to study in Italy, for example, they would pay about half of what they pay in Australia in tuition fees. In fact, about a third of that. Lower visa rejections. These countries are opening up to international students. They're not quite as picky. They don't look into every single bank statement. They don't look at where the money comes from. They don't look at every single personal statement. they are more welcoming. And when I say more welcoming, I mean they are a little bit less difficult to deal with when it comes to getting a student visa. They have plenty of government-backed scholarships and simplified processes for visas and academic entries. They have a more, and you've heard me say this a lot of times, but a more welcoming environment. You don't hear the Prime Minister say, hey, we're going to cap international students. International students are responsible for the skyrocketing renting prices. International students are here to steal jobs from Australians or Canadians. You just don't hear that narrative. And that makes me think, if I was a student, I would consider going to those education destinations where I might feel a little bit more welcome than I am in one of the big four education destinations. And I want to stress this because, again, there is a misconception that the quality of education in a place like Italy or Germany is not quite as high as Australia. Maybe that's what the rankings say. But the reality is that some universities, for example, in Italy, there are some of the oldest universities in the world. I am Italian. I studied at one of the oldest universities in the world. It was founded in 1189, so some 900 years ago. It is a fantastic university. The quality of the education, the quality of the academics is still very, very high. And so those are really good opportunities. One thing that is different there is that in terms of international student recruitment, it's less commercial. If you work for an Australian university, if you work for an agency, you have targets, you have commissions. Everything is about bringing money into the ecosystem, and fairly so. But in those countries, well, it's more about I want to make sure that the student is happy, more so than the actual money. And I think that's something very, very important for certain students. So let's dig in or delve in, I should say, and let's talk about some of the alternative education destinations. Well, of course, the first one that we should be talking about, because in a way, New Zealand has followed the big four, not in terms of volumes, but in terms of their development of the international student ecosystem. New Zealand is very safe. It is incredibly safe as Australia, in my humble opinion, safer than Canada, the US, and possibly the UK as well. By the way, all these countries are incredibly safe, but New Zealand and Australia, purely due to their, or by virtue of them being removed from the main theaters of the world, is safe. New Zealand is stable. Politics-wise, again, I don't want to go into the politics, but they've had a change of government very recently. But before then, they had a very long period of time with the same political parties at the helm, and their political systems are designed. It is quality institutions in New Zealand. 1 to 3 year post-study work rights, depending on level and location of study, competitive cost of living and tuitions. When we compare New Zealand and Australia, the difference is not huge, but you'll find that tuition fees and cost of living in New Zealand is slightly lower than certainly metropolitan areas in Australia, and quite possibly cheaper than Canada and the UK as well. There's a huge focus on innovation, sustainability, and STEM courses. And what I think, again, this is personal opinion, but what I think they've done a lot better than we have done in Australia is embedding the Indigenous culture, or integrating the Indigenous culture in the teachings at New Zealand universities. And of course, the pathways to permanent residencies are very much tied to skill shortages areas like in Australia. Now, this is where things get interesting, because I bet none of you knows, oh, sorry, this is presumptuous of me to say that, but if you are like me, you've always seen the world, okay, I need to recruit students for Australia. All I worry about is Australia. All I know about is Australia. All the rules I know are Australia. Well, there is a whole world of opportunities out there, namely Europe. We at AIG can place your students in Ireland, in France, in Italy. It is a portfolio of institutions that keeps expanding. So if you ask me, in 3 months, maybe we'll have a few in Spain and Germany as well. For now, that's the countries that we serve. And there are some really, really cool value propositions there. Italy, it is rich in culture. Well, you know, their whole economy is heavily reliant on tourism. It is a country where if you go to Rome, the Eternal City, you see history that dates back almost 3,000 years. And so the idea of just going to a public university in a 16th century or 12th century building is, to me, something absolutely unique and fantastic. They have very strong courses in design, architecture, art, as well as hospitality, tourism, and cookery, but also really good business programs as well, particularly the private universities. France, world-class institutions, English taught degrees. I want to stress this point that all the universities that we work with in Europe, regardless of the main language spoken outside the university, the programs are taught in English. So the 2 universities we work with in Italy, 2 in France, and the ones in Ireland, of course, every single program is fully taught in English. All the internships are in English. Everything is in English. Of course, if the student goes out and buys food and goes to a local restaurant, they might speak Italian if they are in Italy, or French if they are in France. But every single program that we sell is taught in English, and Italy and France offer very affordable tuitions. I promise I'll get to that table in just about a minute, so you can see the actual hard figures. Germany and Netherlands, 2 very strong economies, or I should say economies that are stronger in the European Union, in the context of the European Union. So good opportunities for students to both study and work there. Very STEM focused, so very technology heavy, and with work study opportunities as well. And Ireland, in a way, you can compare to the UK, except it's cheaper, except it's a little bit more welcoming, except there's no ban on dependence. And you might argue that some parts of Ireland, I'm going to offend someone here, but some parts of Ireland are really, really pretty, maybe prettier than the UK. No, I shouldn't say this. The 2 countries are absolutely fantastic in terms of the landscape and the nature that Ireland offers. These very green, very lush landscapes that are absolutely breathtaking and stunning. But it is an education destination that is literally very close to the UK at a cheaper price, and as I said, with a slightly more friendly policy or migration policy. So I wanted to put this together just to give you an idea of what you're looking at in terms of the cost of the entire value proposition in a place like Italy versus one of our partners in Australia, one of our best, or the universities with which we have one of the closest partnerships, and that's the University of Technology in Sydney. In Italy, we worked with the American University of Florence. It is an American institution, but they have a large campus in the heart of Florence in a 16th century building. Stunning, like just really absolutely stunning. They have some of the best business, arts, architecture, cookery, hospitality, and tourism management courses in Italy. And they place their students for internships in international restaurants and international hotels. So a fantastic value proposition. Every single program is taught in English. And so, but the tuition fees, as you can see, are anywhere between half and a quarter of what you would pay in Australia. So for the price that you pay in Australia 1 year, you can study a whole 3-year degree in Italy. Cost of living is cheaper, roughly half of what you'd pay in Australia. This is a bracket, yeah, but roughly half of what you would pay in Australia. The language of instruction is very much English. I want to stress this just in case that wasn't clear. And in terms of the popular programs, well, for the American University of Florence, as I said, it's arts, design, humanities, and hospitality management, whereas UTS it's more engineering, business, IT. But we do have really good universities that teach these programs in Europe as well. Post-study work options, as I said earlier, there is one in Italy. As long as the student applies for the job seeker visa immediately before the student visa expires, they will get it. They don't need to be sponsored. They don't need to have a job by then. It gives them 12 months to find a job where they employ the skills that they've learned at the American University of Florence, and then they get to stay on if they like to, or if there is a good opportunity. And of course, the cultural experience. If you've ever visited Europe, the feel and the experience is completely different to a place like Sydney or Melbourne. This is not to say that Sydney or Melbourne are not great. It's just that they are much newer cities. So if you go to Europe and spend a couple of years studying in Europe, you're completely immersed in rich, long, and beautiful history. If you go to the southern part of Italy, for example, there's been a lot of Greek and Arabic and Spanish influence. So you see this melting pot of history that is absolutely breathtaking and fantastic. And then there's Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia, I wanted to put it here just to give you just to plant a seed in your mind that we work with every single Australia and New Zealand. I don't think there is any New Zealand university with a campus in Southeast Asia, but most Australian universities with a campus in Southeast Asia. Why is that important? Because it's a pathway into Australia. So let's delve into this. Malaysia, Indo, Thailand, Vietnam, their economies are mostly roaring. Their economies are developing quite fast, and if you go to places like Bangkok or Jakarta or Ho Chi Minh City, you'll see that it's actually very, very developed. Aside from the traffic, you wouldn't be able to distinguish a place like Jakarta from Melbourne. And so this is quite important, because we won't be able to place a student in a place where they are completely comfortable. They offer very high quality education through either local institutions or T&E hubs for Western universities. And so the best example, and apologies, I said best, but the newest example of this is the Western Sydney campus in Surabaya. There's RMIT in Vietnam, there's Swinburne and Curtin in Malaysia, there's Monash in Malaysia as well. And often when you go to those campuses, they are located in within a Southeast Asian metropolis, but they look and feel exactly like if you are in Melbourne, in Perth, in Sydney, or wherever the main campus might be. There is obviously a much lower cost of living. I was recently in Malaysia. I think I went out for dinner and I had an amazing meal, traditional Malay food. I had an amazing meal that would have cost me, I reckon, 100 Australian dollars in Australia. It cost me about 20 in Malaysia, and I eat a lot, but cost of living, affordability, rents, that's a lot cheaper than Australia. There is a more and more aggressive, aggressive is not the right word, but certainly a desire from these education destinations to draw international students in. Malaysia, for example, has come out saying we want to have more than 200,000 international students studying here on a regular basis in the future. And there's the safety, the food, which is very different to what you find in the West, but very interesting, the ability to travel, and that very strong sense of community that you feel often in Southeast Asia, particularly in campuses that are slightly removed from the city center of the larger Southeast Asian metropolis. But this is the thing that I really want you to start thinking about. For a student that wants to study, let's say, at Western Sydney, and might find it difficult to go to Parramatta or Liverpool or Sydney straight away, they can go to Surabaya, to Surabaya, study there 1 or 2 years, and then transfer to the Sydney campus. During that 1 or 2 years at the Indonesian campus, they pay much lower tuition fees, about a third of what they would pay in Parramatta or in Liverpool. And not only that, but they can also more easily obtain a visa because they already are enrolled into a program. So for a student based in Mongolia, or no, let's pick, for example, a riskier country such as the Philippines, it might be a very good option to look into going to Indonesia for 1 year, paying a lot less in tuition fees, and then apply for a student visa for Australia to complete their program in Australia. If they pick a bachelor and they study 1 year in Indonesia, they can still study 2 years in Australia, be eligible for post-study work rights, and getting a visa might be slightly easier. So I want you to think about this as a pathway to Australia. And why does this matter to you? Well, because students are savvy, they read the news, they know that maybe the big 4 education destinations are not quite as welcoming as they used to be. If the cap is enforced, students and parents want, absolutely desire quality alternatives. There are parents growing concerns, and I think students as well, about safety in the West. I won't name names, but there are some, and there has even been, recent safety concerns in some of the education destinations that we spoke about today. And we think, certainly that's very much the case at AIG. We think that the dream of studying abroad will never die. So, okay, Australia might have introduced an international student cap, but students still want to go and study abroad. And so what do I do now? Well, you can ask myself, you can ask your business development managers, you can ask V about opportunities in alternative destinations. Please do ask. Even if you're not intending to place a student in Italy, please do ask, because I promise you, in the next couple of years, there's going to be a student that says, I want to go to Australia, I want to go to Uni Melbourne. Melbourne Uni is completely full. You're going to have to wait another year. No, I don't want to wait another year. Oh, okay. Maybe I can consider something else. So please do inform yourself, do read up, and ask us questions about opportunities in alternative destinations. You can ask Achiever and use a Uni Match tool, which I'll show you in about a minute. And if you have a student to the idea of studying in Europe, speak with us. He'll help you. We will help you cancel him or her. And I just want to show you, I'm running out of time. I just want to show you very, very briefly that if you go to Achiever and you ask, are there alternative education destinations to Australia, UK, US, Canada, Achiever will help you. So when you are looking for information, you can absolutely ask Achiever with all the follow-up questions as well. So for example, what are the top universities in Germany for engineering? Or, oh, this is an interesting one. What are the living costs for international student in Sweden? And you can say, okay, are there post-study work rights in Italy? And so this is a really good source of knowledge for you. And so you can see this is the name, yeah, for staying on after completing your course. This is so good because it gives you a very broad overview of the opportunities that the students can take advantage of in those countries. When the student is really interested in it, all they do is contact with a counselor. As you know, this is a lead generation capability, or it is a way for the student to get in contact directly with you. So the student asks all the questions, Achieva answers all the questions. You can use Achieva as well to find out more about what really is that makes Europe or other education destinations such an attractive value proposition. And then once their lead is captured, you've got their contact details, and it's up to you how you convert the student. I think that's me for today. I've spoken for a very, very long time. I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of what we just discussed. And please do ask any questions. If there are any, you can write it in the Q&A box or in the chat box or wherever you like. I'm checking WhatsApp to see if my colleagues have questions for me, so apologies for that. Okay, I think we're running to the 45-minute mark, so we'll stop it here. Do get in touch, share this with your students, with your colleagues. And I do invite you once again to start thinking about, the you keep thinking about the four education destinations. They will always be the most important ones and the ones that will draw the majority of the students. But the international student mobility landscape has changed, and has changed very significantly. So please do look at those alternative destinations as well. Oh, there's a question here. Oh, please share the recording and the PPT. Of course, Williana, 100%. That will be done. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate you coming. If there are any further questions or comments, I'll wrap it up and see you at the next webinar. Bye for now.